Good afternoon and welcome everybody to General Grant Council Presents. Today, it is my honor to be presenting someone who I have known and worked with for a long time. Right Illustrious Companion, Adam Hathaway, the Grand Principal Conductor of the Work of New Mexico. I've known him since 2009, January of 2009, actually. And we've had many intersections of work in masonry, but he has done a few things that I haven't gone anywhere near. Past Grand Master of Masons in New Mexico, just past Grand Commander of the Grand Commandery of Knights Templar of New Mexico, and of course he is the sitting Grand Principal Conductor of the Work, and he's also on the General Grant Council Education Committee. And today I'm actually going to let him describe his presentation, but I'm going to get it wrong because I did it from memory instead of having it in front of me. I believe it's discovering the cryptic secrets. Adam Hathaway.
Right, puissant companion. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I was surprised and mildly frightened that you knew the exact month of our meeting, but of course, slightly disappointed that you completely forgot the title of my presentation, although the words were really close and somewhat synonymous. So thank you very much for the introduction. It is excellent being here. I appreciate the invitation to come and share this presentation with you that I made most recently at the Southwest Department Conference. And so the presentation is Seeking Cryptic Truths. And one of the reasons I'm really excited about this presentation is when I first got involved in Yorkite Masonry, and everything was coming in very quickly, I confess there were many things I didn't understand. And it took me a very long time to learn certain things. And I made a horrible assumption, which I have found later that other new folks will sometimes also have the same horrid assumption. In my ignorance, when I was thinking about the Royal and Select Master degrees, my first thought was, oh yeah, these are the degrees that are just the bridge from Royal Arch to the Commandery. And that's just what they're there for. They provide great lessons, and they give us some more symbols. And it's just the second out of the three. And then as I got into the line of the council at my local council and started doing research so that I could actually do the job that the ritual requires us to do by learning, sharing, and teaching, I discovered that what had been skillfully hidden is some of the most profound symbolism that I have found in the Masonic lessons. And so this presentation today, well, essentially highlights my favorite and the things that I also missed along the way. And so I want to share some of my discoveries with you. And so first, these are the resources that I used when I developed this presentation. The first is a manual of the council by Albert G. Mackey, a famous name in Masonry. I recommend that you read this. It helped me begin to understand some of the complexities and deep approaches to cryptic Masonry. By the way, there's also a similar book in a similar style, for reasons I don't understand, by Mackey, is called A Book of the Chapter. So for whatever reason, we have the book of the chapter and the manual of the council. You do these things, find the PDF, download the PDF for free. I also used our ritual, And as you know, have been some permutations of the ritual over the last couple of years as the General Grand Council is publishing new and improved and more explanatory versions. So this is the one here, the 2018 provisional edition that I had gotten my mitts on. And so these are the two sources I've used, and I invite you all to examine and explore them. And of course, we should all be as conversant with our degrees as much as possible. I also have another shameful confession. The Royal and Select Master degrees are the only two in cryptic masonry that I've taken. So I am looking forward to completing my cryptic journey by taking the other degree that I have not yet taken. So all of my knowledge comes from the Royal and Select Master degrees and the Manual of the Council. So one of the things that the students in the classroom during our festivals that they find confusing is everything takes place in, especially when you look at the Royal and Select Master degrees, they get a little confused. Hiram is alive. Hiram has passed. Hiram's alive again. And so this concept here of trying to put the passion plays in the York Rite tradition in chronological order is a little tricky, but it helps the candidates kind of get a feel for things when if the candidates are very linear and they like their stories in chronological order, and they get thrown a little bit when they realize that they're not in chronological order. And by the way, in New Mexico, we have a pretty robust classroom experience. So between the degrees, when our crew is setting up for the next degree, the candidates are in the classroom. And so we answer their questions, we set up the next degree, and we explain this issue with the chronology. So the idea of putting these in chronological order was not my idea. It was started, in my experience, by most excellent companion Dennis Detro. And then when it became my time to transition from just student to student teacher, I took a stab at this as well. So in the Royal Master degree, at the beginning, Hiram is alive and he is worshiping at the altar. And at this point, he is alive. The Select Master, he is alive and in the vault, if you remember, having the adventures with Zaybud and that story. Then we bounce back to the Master Mason degree, where in the second section, he's alive and then he gets murdered. In the Mark Master Mason degree, he has just been murdered. The conversation at the beginning between the two craftsmen tell us that he has just been murdered. And so the completion of the temple has been stalled. And of course, we find out later that after Hiram's death, the reason it got stalled is they couldn't find the capstone, because they later found it in the same place where Hiram's murdered body was disposed of. So essentially it fell out of a pocket or fell out of a pouch. And then we go to the Royal Master second part, where Hiram has passed. Then we go to Most Excellent Master, where we discuss the temple in general being consecrated. And of course, Hanukkah and the tragedy that created Hanukkah played a role in the consecration of the temple being postponed, or the reconsecration of the temple. And then flash forward a long time, and you've got the Royal Arch degree, which talks about the rebuilding of the temple. So this is the chronology that I crafted together based on the inspiration from Dennis Detro. I hope that that works for everybody and hopefully clears some things up. It does seem to work for the candidates. Now let's talk about the development of the word cryptic. Where did it come from? What does it mean? Well, the earliest usage is found in ancient Greek, crypto, and to conceal. So first, it was anything we're going to conceal or hide. You could use the word cryptic. Well, that works for us as Masons, right? We like that because we have heard that the glory of God is to conceal the word or whatever it is that we are veiling and reveiling. A different pronunciation of the word reveal, to reveal. And of course, cryptic masonry is about preserving. And if you have to preserve certain items or lessons from the ravages of war, then those things would be hidden for a period of time. Well, the Latin cryptius meant subterranean. So now the word has transitioned to mean we're going to hide things underground. That is why burials have been underground for thousands of years. It's not simply a way to dispose of the body because burning is probably the most efficient. But the Greek and the Hebrew cultures took and take very seriously how a body is disposed of. And as you know, especially highlighted by the story of Hanukkah, that the Greek culture and the Hebrew culture at the time got intermingled. Look at the alphabet. The Greek alphabet and the Hebrew alphabet are a lot closer to each other than either of them are to the English alphabet. So it isn't just the language that commingled, or the alphabet just a little bit, but also some culture. And the Hebrews at the time were fighting to keep the Greek culture from overwhelming theirs. And again, see the story of Hanukkah. So now cryptic began to mean underground. And of course, in the Greek culture, the afterlife, the part of it that's Tartarus, which we attribute to hell, which maybe kind of sort of, maybe a little bit of purgatory along with hell. But the afterlife for most people, you got there by going underground. So by burying someone underground, you started them on their journey. And of course, if you take a look at the Greek mythologies of the story where a certain warrior had fallen and the gods were coming down to make him immortal because they felt sorry for him, but the last act of this mortal that they were going to favor was to destroy the body of his enemy lying next to him. Well, forget it. You did the worst thing you possibly could. You desecrated a corpse. So you're not getting anything, and we're going to do something horrible to you in Tartarus. And of course, in Hebrew law, one of the worst things you can do is desecrate a body. So you put it underground for safe keeping, for the journey. Notice that gravestones often say rest in peace. Rest. The body and the soul are still commingled and they're resting for a period of time. Why don't gravestones say see you on the other side? Bon voyage. Because we still have this culture of rest in peace. So you put things underground to protect them, to save them, and as good cryptic masons, to preserve them. Now, that is why when we even have mausoleums or other buildings that are actually above ground, we still call them crypts, even though they're not actually underground anymore, these ones that are above, but there's still the idea of this is where the body is resting. So in that context, we've lost this idea that cryptus is underground, but we've associated it with a place to store revered or holy things. And along that line, when Christians were being persecuted in Rome and other places, their underground meetings were called cryptae. So the same idea of, well, we'll meet underground where it's safe. The Roman guards won't find us if we're meeting down here. So over thousands of years, crypt became a common term for depositories of bodies, whether it's above ground or not, anything hidden above ground or not. Modern use of cryptic denotes anything secretive or requiring further investigation. If someone's asking you about something you don't want to talk about and you're hedging your language, you're selecting it because you're concerned about revealing something you don't want to reveal, somebody might say to you, "Why are you being so cryptic? Just speak plainly. Why are you being cryptic?" And so the modern usage talks about something being cryptic as secretive or requiring further investigation. And for cryptic Masons, I'm really okay with exploring into that definition as well, because that's what we are doing. We are exploring the things that we have secreted into our crypts for preservation. And of course, it refers to a vault, whether specific or metaphorical. So we've already discussed that a crypt can be a repository of sacred things. And we learned in the third degree of Masonry that when you go to the Grand Lodge above and you leave the mortal coil, as we know physically, you cannot take it with you. If is your house, your car, your money, the old saying, you can't take it with you. But what you can take with you is anything that you can store in the repository of the faithful breast. So there is in the second section of the third degree, there is a passport to leave Israel and go to Ethiopia. Now, let's take a look at the medieval influences of the symbolism of Ethiopia. So, in the Middle Ages, so for several hundreds, if not more years, Ethiopia, most people didn't get a chance to travel to. And so it was that holy place over there. It's a holy place. And there's a legend of somebody called Prester John. And originally, Prester John, Prester means elder, like priest or monsignor. It became a title, a religious title for some groups, to be pastor. So Prester John, or Pastor John, was this figure who was over in Ethiopia, and he was a good man, and this was a very good place to live in. Well, the legend over a few hundred years changed to that this was kind of a quasi-Christ-like figure who presided over a place that was kind of heaven on earth. Because what better place for a Christ-like figure to rule is heaven, or heaven on earth. Now we know that Jerusalem also was considered heaven on earth. So was Ethiopia. In fact, there's an Ethiopian tribe this day who will tell you that they have the Ark of the Covenant. They won't let you see it, but they have it. And there's a family whose job it is to guard it. So in the second degree, the passport is that going to Ethiopia symbolizes our passport to heaven. So what is it then that we have to take? And of course, that's the lost word. And where do we hide it? Where do we preserve it so that when we go to heaven, to the afterlife, to build our second temple after the first one, the mortal one here on earth, that passport can only be stored. And remember what the passport is, the lost word, remember what it is. The only place it can be preserved is in I'm tapping my heart, you can't see it, the repository of the faithful breast. So we're talking about, so the Royal and Select Master degrees talk about placing those items that must be preserved in a sacred vault so that upon the building of the second temple, those valuable items will be found and brought forward in the same way that the lost word will be brought forward and will serve as your passport to the Grand Lodge above. So the attainment of truth is the wage received by earnest Masons mentioned in the Masonic ritual. So when the senior warden pays wages, if aught be due, many lodges will give tokens that count for the pennies that we saw given out as wages in the Mark Master Mason degree. Some will say, oh, it's time to pay the wages, and they'll give certificates or thank volunteers or anything like that. According to Mackey, and I tend to agree with him, that what you're really paid for or paid with in Masonry as a result of your work is truth. Yes, to thank your volunteers. Yes, if you have tokens of goodwill or certificates or any awards that you give, those are fabulous. But above all of that is the search for truth. And of course, if you're searching, then you are participating in the cycle of concealing and revealing. Because as you know in the Royal Arch degree, searching is part of the process of concealing and revealing. So teaching you to search in general, so that searching for the truth becomes an everyday and every moment activity. A permanent part of my prayer list is to see the truth. And just to take a sidestep for a second, I'm very much into the virtues. I believe that Masonry is a virtue-driven organization, as are all of its bodies and all of its degrees. There are virtues. Some are explained very obviously, and some are hidden a little bit. You got to dig to find the virtuous applications mentioned in the degrees. So truth isn't not telling a lie. Oh, I'm an honest person. Oh, well, that's great. That's the virtue of honesty. So yes, we talk about a truthful person as somebody who doesn't lie, somebody who's honest. But if we start to dig, why is it that the ritual says that truth is a divine attribute? We have all these virtues. Why did truth get tapped? And here's the theory, and some of you may not buy it, but God is unchanging and ageless. So God always will be what God has always been. The truth, being a divine attribute, is just as unchanging. There is one truth. I don't care to argue about what it is. I'm just saying that there's one truth, and each of us have our own perceptions of the truth. So when people say, well, perception is reality, no, it's not, because if I think I can jump off my roof and fly around it 7 or 8 times, I would be able to do so. So perception is not reality. But when dealing with each other, perception has the force or the influence of reality, which is why, as seekers of the truth, we have to be very careful as we are keeping our passions in due bounds, that we are keeping our perceptions in line with the truth as much as we are able to. And that is why I pray for truth, so that my ability to see what is will become clearer. We also notice that Adoniram, mentioned in the Book of Kings in the Bible, is the royal master who, previous to the death of Master Hiram, labors to build his earthly temple. So he's working and working. And he's also seeking. Part of the passion play is he goes to his good friend, the king, who is representing the divine master, God. And the divine, and God essentially says, no, you can't have the truth. And Adoniram just doesn't understand why not. Why aren't I good enough? And of course, there's a reason we find out later there's numbers we have to keep and all kinds of things. But we learn in Blue Lodge that as we are moving from the rough ashlar to the perfect ashlar, that we're not going to become the perfect ashlar while we are still alive. So if we're asking for perfection right now, the great architect's not going to give it to us. Not until we pass from the mortal coil. And he doesn't want us taking our lives so that we go there faster. So what does he say? Wait for it. It'll come. Wait for it. And so Adoniram is told that wages, refreshment, and rest are on the other side of the gates of death. So according to Mackey, we're kind of bringing that symbolism of the second temple in the afterlife, which is containing those things that were deposited in the sacred breast. They're waiting there for you, and you have to be patient. But while you're being patient and waiting for that divine gift, keep working, keep searching. One of my favorite paradoxes, you'll hear it called the mystical paradox or the Kabbalistic paradox. And that is, a mystic is someone who knows that he will never understand the mind of God. A mystic is someone who spends his entire life trying to understand the mind of God. What does that mean? Keep working, keep looking. One of the symbols that I want to highlight because it's my favorite are the kerubim. Now, sometimes we'll hear them called cherubim, which is fine. It's an anglicization of the Hebrew word for this particular choir of angels. I prefer to get a little closer to the Hebrew, so the kerubim. If you say cherubim, that's fine. What I would love for you to avoid, though, is calling them cherubs. Or, God, even worse, cherubims. So the cherub, kerub is a singular, and the kerubim are plural or a choir. In the same way that geese come in gaggles, or crows come in murders, angels come in choirs. And there are levels. Some choirs are higher than others. So the kerubim are a choir of angels who, and they have different roles in the Bible, and they have different roles in other religious treaties and texts. The Hebrews have many, and Islam has many. And so you might get conflicting duties for the different choirs of angels. But in Ezekiel, the kerubim are depicted as having two sets of wings. You can see them down here, the overlapping wings. And they also have four faces. If you look at the picture on the right, you can see that the four faces are distributed evenly because you've got the eagle in the back, and so they kind of bring his head up forward so you can see him, but he's actually facing the other way. That kerubim with the faces of the eagle, the man, the ox, and the lion, you will remember from the banners in the Royal Arch degree. So here they come again. And in some traditions, each of them represents a different archangel. So there's a lot going on. And so you're saying, wait a minute, archangel, but you just said they were cherubim. Like I said, the symbols float around a little bit in their duties and their meanings based on which particular lens of perception that you're putting on at the particular time. So for the kerubim who are keeping an eye on the Ark of the Covenant, these are the four faces dealing in this particular tradition. And they generally reside in the presence of God. Now remember, while the children of Egypt were roaming around and they hadn't constructed a temple yet, or even in the tabernacle of the wilderness, the presence of God, the Shekinah, the presence of God was in the ark. And that is why the temple was so important. Having the ark as a consecrated place for the earthly spirit of God to be housed is great. His Majesty required something like the temple, which is why its creation and consecration are so important and provide lessons for us. So one of the questions that I get, even though it's explained in the ritual, but the candidates are receiving a lot of information at one time, we do get the question, who are those guys standing in white, and why were they turning like that, and what were they doing, and why were they standing over Hiram? Okay, so the kerubim generally reside in the presence of God. So when there's a few things going on. So when Hiram was praying, he was protected by the kerubim. And presuming that the ark had been placed in the secret vault, then the angels are not just protecting Hiram, but they're also protecting the Ark of the Covenant that's placed in the vault. So here's an analogy. If you earnestly pray to God, then you will be protected by his angels. So there's a lot going on here. And so the brothers who are wearing white and their arms are outstretched, and the Bible says that the wings of the cherubim stretch from horizon to horizon. So they, being angels and non-corporeal figures most of the time, their wings can stretch through the world and also be protecting Hiram, or you, and the Ark of the Covenant. So that's what's going on. Their wings are stretched to protect this sacred place, and they turn to allow you to pass. You, being or soon to be, a royal and select master, are given the privilege of going within the wingspan of their protection, and you have also earned their protection by being loyal followers of the Supreme Architect. There are sacred treasures that were placed in the vault according to the Royal Arch in the year of light 3000, which is approximately 2,782 years ago. So the current year of light, if you're ever curious and you want to know, well, I really wish I knew what the current year of light is, it's the Hebrew year. So actually, I think I'm off by one. but the year of light is the Hebrew year. So right now you're in the year of light 5,783 or 82, I'll have to check. And the sacred treasures were placed in the year 3000. Whether that is literal or whether that is symbolic, because there's a lot going on with the number 3 and 3000, I don't know, but that's the lesson. So in there went the Ark of the Covenant, the pot of manna, Aaron's rod, the book of the law, and the triangle with the lost word placed on top of the ark. So how convenient that we now have a degree that explains why those items, or how those items, were placed into the ark that was placed into the vault that was then discovered back in the Royal Arch degree, which takes place in the future. And so now we're talking about valuable things just don't get stored on their own. We're just not going to have the light of God within us. I mean, we have the light of God within us. We all have it, but some of us choose. And so a rabbi that I'm working with says we all have shells. Everybody and everything has shells. Some of our shells are opaque and you can't see through them. And some of our shells are translucent. So people, we all have the light of God in us, but those of us who have learned and studied and have faith and know what the lost word means and have that repository, is placely saved in the repository of the sacred breast, then our shells are becoming more translucent so the light can be seen. So as we wrap up this presentation, before we take a quick break for recording purposes and then move to questions, just to wrap it up, cryptic masonry is about the preservation of the things that matter. And the things that matter the most are preserved in the repository of the sacred breast, so that when we leave the mortal coil, that is what we are able to take with us to serve as a passport to the Grand Lodge above. And if you're like, well, how do I know if I have the passport required in the repository of my sacred breast? Well, if you know that, then you can master the virtue of truth. And in the mean, since we truly won't have it till we're on the other side, keep seeking, my companions. Keep seeking.